A few days ago in this mysterious world, the seal of the spatial rift, which is under the protection of the Temple of the Ninth Star, was broken. As a result, it led to fatal consequences, namely the attack of beasts and monsters from other planets. They were just countless, and each with some unique abilities. The people knew about it, thanks to the sirena, which began to make very loud noises, and then notified that a wave of alien beasts was coming. Unfortunately, the only way out in this situation is to prepare for battle, and after a decent fight, especially for men, they must protect their women and children. No one could even imagine that the world that had recently found balance would be destroyed again, and even more so in such a way. In the course of the battle, the guys fully felt how strong their opponent was, and started talking about retreating, because this is clearly not an ordinary invasion, and it is necessary to prepare better. This guy with a huge, magical sword is called Ben. He himself is a legendary swordsman who has simply incredible power. Such a specimen as Ben, beasts are interested in the most, so to increase their chances of victory, they try to attack him, as large groups as possible. Based on the fact that there were too many creatures, the guy concluded that most likely all the units holding the defenses on the rift had already been destroyed. As it may sound, but this kind of thoughts only motivated him, and made him fight on to the fullest. The most important thing is that his holy sword is with him, and all enemies will surely lose their lives because of it. A little backstory: at the moment Ben is 18 years old, he is an awakened genius S-class. Since 10 years old, together with his father Charlie protected the Temple of the Ninth Star. One day, as a true defender, he was awarded the Holy Sword, after which the oath was held, where the guy swore an oath that as a hero will defend his homeland, to the last drop of blood, with this sword in his hands. Then after his son, with one voice swore and all his army, stand for the Ninth Star, to the last drop of their blood. Long before the birth of all these warriors around the earth, 12 cosmic rifts were formed. They, along with the awakened planets, founded a temple of 12 stars to once and for all banish the invading beasts into the rifts and seal them there. It had been a long time since this terrible battle had begun, and Charlie was so tired that he couldn't stand on his feet without support. Ben had asked him fiercely to get out of here as soon as possible, because it was very dangerous, but for some reason his father had held off until the last possible moment. It ended up causing the man to be attacked at the most inconvenient moment, by 2 strong monsters at once and one from the back. Unconventional. Charlie was powerful enough to deal with them, but considering the fact that his strength was practically at 0, everything was coming to a head. Unfortunately, this battle would be his last. When Ben saw it all with his own eyes, he immediately rushed to help, but unfortunately it was too late. Instead of saving them, they only managed to talk a little, and it was the father who asked his son to be strong, and to continue to live for the Temple of 9 Stars, because now on his shoulders will fall even more responsibility. After all of the above, the father takes his last breath of air and loses his life right in the middle of the battlefield, in front of his entire army. Of course, no son in such a situation can remain cold-blooded, which is why he let his emotions run wild and started screaming loudly. Suddenly, at this unfortunate moment for the guy, some ill-wisher snuck up behind him and delivered one decisive blow. Who would have thought that in one battle, 2 really legendary fighters, on whom everything was based, could lose their lives at once? While Ben could still breathe, he turned his head back and asked who had done it, and more importantly, why. The perpetrator of such a despicable act was a man in a black cloak. According to him, Charlie's family knew too much information that they shouldn't have even heard about. Despite his critical condition, Ben couldn't stop thinking about his father. After a few more seconds, the guy threw his sword to the ground, symbolizing that everything was coming to its logical conclusion. Ben was extremely reluctant to lose his life just like that, because he's not even the most powerful awakened in the world yet, and at the very least, the people demand his protection. Unfortunately, there's no one you can take his place. At one point, when the kid started losing too much blood, his eyes gradually began to close. But when Ben opened them again, he found himself in a completely different place, chained to some cross. To say that the guy is in a normal state is pretty hard to say, because there's still a bunch of his blood around, but nevertheless he can already talk, and more or less function normally. At least now he's curious to know where he is. A little later the feeling of intense pain began, but it is not surprising, because if you look closely, you can see a large number of wounds on the body, even it can be assumed that they appeared recently. Every second became stronger and stronger, because of which the guy just started to scream. Suddenly some pictures started to appear before his eyes, and a little later Ben realized that they were some of the worst memories of his life. For example, here he was running away from two guys who were trying to chase him down and hit him with a stick. Then a third boy joins them. By the looks of it he was at least twice as big, so he wasn't the least bit afraid of Ben, and just like the others with a stick in his hands ran after him to escape. The same guys who wanted to hit him with a stick this time threw him overboard. He started drowning because his arms and legs were bound by seaweed. As it turned out later, at the bottom of this very sea, a man moves through different worlds. For some reason, Ben was not in the most favorable place. From the outside it looks more like hell. From this we can understand that better conditions than hanging on the cross there will not be here. Also, if you look closely, you can see during the time when the guy was just brought to the room, and it was present, the same type with a black cloak, who on the battlefield did at a very inopportune moment for Ben, did his dirty deed. To be honest, Ben even began to doubt that it was his memories, because there were too many locations he hadn't really been to. Then he realized that the boy he had just seen in the memories was also named Ben. A little later, his memory started to return, and he still couldn't stop thinking about how ordinary monsters had managed to take his father's life. In fact, the creatures that had not reached at least SS class would not be able to injure him in the trailer. As soon as Ben at least for a moment manages to let go of the topic of his father, he immediately has another question. Who is this mysterious man in black? And what secrets he was talking about? At one point, however, this frenzied stream of thoughts had to stop, because in the corridor someone began to talk loudly. Just a few moments later, a pair of pumped-up adult men enter Ben's cell. Judging by the look in their eyes, we can assume that their intentions are not the best. As soon as Ben saw them, he immediately began to feel a strong anger towards them, because in front of him stood people who beat him to such an extent that the guy partially lost his memory. Of course, the men did not take him seriously. They were more concerned about the fact that they had to work at night. According to them, even though the kid is really weak, he's quite stubborn, and that's why he deserves to lose his life as soon as possible. Of course, the guy looks extremely small against their background, but the wardens don't even suspect that someone else has been reborn into this body. Deep down, Ben was very grateful to the boy who'd given him his body, and he wanted to pay for it. The boy's wry smile spoke for itself, and something very interesting was about to begin. At one point, Ben falls to the ground on purpose and pretends to lose his life. In fact, the wardens are happy about it, because at least they won't have to get their hands dirty with this little beast again. The guy did not intend to tolerate such a statement, so lying face down on the floor, he decided to insult the guards in response. They were most surprised not by what he said, but by the fact that Ben was still alive, although just a few seconds ago he hadn't given any signs of life at all. In this case, the guys decided not to lose a minute, and tried to finish the guy, but at one point everything went far from their scenario. Just when things were starting to get hot, Ben jumped from his seat with a chain in his hands, jumped into the back of one of the rivals, and took him in his grasp. The guy was so strong that with just a chain in his hands he could move a big guy like that. No one could even begin to imagine such a scenario. Usually the guards decide the fate of the prisoners, but in this case it was the other way around. It was only a few seconds into the fight, and one of the big guys was already unconscious on the floor. Frankly speaking, the second warden is not sure that he has a strong desire to attack. Ben, in turn, wastes no time and takes the weapon from the body lying on the floor. It seemed to the warden that this was just the perfect opportunity to make a run for it, so without thinking long, he makes a sharp dash towards the exit. Ben couldn't even think that the huge man, instead of continuing to fight, would just decide to run. Since the guy does not welcome running away from the battlefield, he takes the chain in his hands again and throws it straight at his feet. After that, it gets very well entangled, and the man right at the front door falls to the floor. Now only God knows what awaits him next. In general, while the opponent is in a desperate situation, Ben takes his new knife in his hands and jumps to the side of the warden lying on the floor to give him a decisive blow. At this moment in his eyes there is only anger and hatred, that even just looking in them you can lose your life. In the end, Ben's plan just worked perfectly. The enemy didn't even have time to rise to his feet. The guy had already done his job, just a few seconds of waiting, and a huge pumped-up body, unconscious, falls to the ground. Despite the fact that everything went more than well, the guy recognized for himself that to commit such actions is still too dangerous, for the reason that this body is too weak for such sharp maneuvers, and in case you miss a blow from the likes of these two, it could end very badly. Since this Ambo still has a pulse, measures must be taken as soon as possible to ensure that he doesn't wake up one day and continue fighting. This man only has to pray that the afterlife will be a good place for him. Now that the two men had been completely neutralized, it was time to run away as soon as possible. The guy's memory had fully returned to him, and thanks to that, he was able to run away without even meeting the guards on his way. After a certain period of time, there was a real commotion in the castle. Someone had exposed the bodies of two warders and the empty cell Ben was in. In order to quickly find the guy, a whole search party with dogs was organized. Unfortunately, they got on the trail pretty quickly, even though the guy was very prompt. To be frank, it even upset him a little. He did not expect that these people would be able to find him. But even despite this sad course of events, Ben was sure that he would not let them catch him, and afterwards he would come back with new strength and avenge his father. In this case, it's a matter of principle, not some personal desire for the love of life. So taking matters into his own hands, Ben jumped from the cliff right into the water. After that, with the greatest possible speed, he started trying to swim away from the rabid mercenaries with dogs. In the meantime, the wardens who remained in the castle reported to the boss that the boy was alive and had managed to escape. Of course, this caused him more negative emotions. After all, it's hard to get your head around the fact that a huge group of mercenaries couldn't keep one boy in the room. And not to sit idly by, he immediately left the castle and went to the aid of his search party in order to maximize the effectiveness of the operation. In the meantime, despite the large number of enemies, the guy was slowly starting to pull away. And when he was about halfway through the swim, he decided to dive underwater. He thought the only salvation at this point was to swim as deep as possible. Jacob, meanwhile, had also joined the operation, using his magical powers to create a huge arm, and tried to catch Ben. To say that the guy was frightened is just not to say anything, because this is something he could not expect. A huge magical hand that is trying to get him right out of the water. It's just something incredible. At one moment the guy was in such a desperate situation that there seemed to be no way to save himself. The hand was right in front of him and was about to grab him. The guy even started screaming, right under the water, not sparing precious oxygen. But as luck would have it, the seaweed that was supposed to lower the man to the bottom was a little faster than Jacob's magical hand. And at just the right moment, it lowered Ben a couple of meters down, so that the hand slammed right in front of him, but didn't even catch him. Jacob realized that the waterweed was getting in the way, so he decided to go underwater to get Ben out. Jacob realized that the seaweed was getting in the way, so he decided to go underwater to get Ben. By the way, for some reason, in the water he felt more than good. Most likely magical abilities allow him to be underwater for an infinite amount of time, and if to put it simply, then roughly speaking, provide an opportunity to breathe normally. In order to help Ben, the waterweed threw all of its strength into Jacob's side, and slowly it began to wrap him up, and then it wrapped him up completely, which may seem like a victory at first glance, but it's not all that easy, because Jacob is really strong, and the weed can't hold him back for long. With just a little effort, the boss slowly began to break free, and after a few seconds, he was completely free. But it was worth it, because in this situation, every second counts, and that's exactly what happened as Jacob struggled to break free. Ben has already started the process of rebooting the system in full swing. At least that's what his brightly glowing eyes tell us. Unfortunately, this process is not the fastest, so there may still be some difficulties. At the moment, the guy is no longer held by the algae, he is completely free floating. Jacob took advantage of this, of course, and began to interrupt the rebooting process in every way he could. Then, at one point, something really strange started happening behind Jacob's back. For some reason, this river was really on Ben's side, doing its best or he'd only succeed. Meanwhile, Ben was already fully chained to Earth, symbolizing that the penultimate stage of the reboot was underway, with only a few more to go. Jacob, in turn, realizing that things were getting hot, was once again forced to use magic to destroy all the fish that were in his way. Ben had already moved to a completely different place. His anger had no limit, he couldn't believe that the target, who was so close, had managed to get away from him, let alone escape from a heavily guarded castle. Strangely enough, the place Ben had moved to was already dry, and before exploring the area, he had to recover a little, because the long stay underwater, the guy involuntarily, because he was running out of oxygen, drew some water into himself. Then looking around, the guy noticed a very large silhouette in front of him, with bright white wings behind it. The boy looked around and noticed a very large silhouette in front of him, with bright white wings on its back, and a blue light emitting from its face. Out of desperation, Ben just directly started to ask who is standing in front of him, and how he can help him. This mysterious character answered that it is not necessary to know who he is, and also added that the guy at the moment needs to think about his body. In general, as it turned out, this god did not have much time to hold long discussions, so he asked as soon as possible to make a choice. Initially, he would not understand what it was about, but then the system screen appeared in front of him, with some question and an answer option. In general, there were written quite scary things, for example, that the Earth in a year will face a catastrophe, which will come to terrible consequences, but if Ben agrees to activate the system of God, he will have the opportunity to save humanity. To be honest, there have been more questions than answers so far, but it all sounds very interesting nonetheless. Now it's time to weigh the pros and cons of staying a year in this pathetic body, or take the path of the Savior. Most likely, if the guy agrees, they will definitely find him and want revenge. And of course, he will not be able to stand up for himself, so in this situation the choice is obvious. It is necessary to begin to master the system of God, to become bigger and stronger, as well as at the most important time to save humanity from the threat that should manifest itself within a year. Ben just has to find out the whole truth, and avenge for his father, as well as for all the brothers who were defeated in the battle for the temple of this star. After a positive answer, the system displayed the guy's personal statistics. From now on, he can always control his progress. Also, a little later, the system alerted to what kind of martial art the guy would be trained in. By happy coincidence, it coincided that this very art was taught to him by his father. In this whole situation, only one thing is pleasing. At one time, Ben kept his mental power at S-class. Thanks to just 2 points of extra points, the guy will be able to regain his S-class in no time. When the guy looked at everything, the teleportation process started. After moving, Ben found himself in a rather favorable place. It was quite warm outside, the sun was shining, there was green grass, rocky mountains, and a beautiful body of water, from which the guy had just climbed out. In general, the guy was insanely happy that he had another chance to change everything in his life. Before leaving, the water grass began to show various beautiful figures. Based on this, Ben assumed that she understood him, and even chatted with her a little. In the end, they were so loaded that they even decided to hug goodbye. From the outside, it looks very cute. When the farewell ceremony was over, Ben noticed in the reflection that his original face was finally back, which is just great. By the way, to protect the user in the system, another face will be used. This will help to secure the account and guarantee security. In general, Ben was insanely happy, and so far he did not regret that he had taken this hard path. The guy will definitely save the world, and at the same time find the one who took his father's life, and then take revenge, and send this scoundrel where he belongs. The plans were grandiose, all that was left was to realize them. Suddenly, the guy felt someone else's presence, turned back sharply and asked who was here. It turned out to be some kid, who reported that the Temple of the Ninth Star has already as 3 days left the ground, and all the people who live there and in their lives, because of the great monster invasion. Even though this guy sounded pretty confident, Ben said there was no way he would believe him, and started attacking. He wasn't even bothered by the fact that his opponent was a much higher level, and it was a really stupid idea to fight him. The stranger didn't mind fighting in principle, because he felt his superiority. Ben told him at once not to relax, because at least he sees all his skills, and knows that in front of him is a dark magician who used forbidden arts. By the way, if someone finds out about it, then the person who resorted to such methods could be in serious trouble. To put it mildly, the opponent was shocked. He could not understand how an ordinary kid F class even thought of such a thing. In response, the guy said that this is not any miracles, but the very real reality, and such a worthless opponent as this magician never guess how to learn to do the same. At one point Ben lost control, and could no longer feel the strength of his opponent. This suggests that the random encounter was not who he claimed to be. His strength felt to be close to D class. This is a very high level indeed. As suddenly right during the battle, in front of us would appear as many as 3 shadows of the opponent. As a rule it is very rare, and most mages cannot experience more than 2. At this point, we can only say one thing: the situation is really critical, and it's hard to imagine what to do. Because this mage was able to take the F-class guy by surprise, he started to cheer so much as if his opponent was S-class. He also said that we had a level that had to sacrifice the abilities of the awakened. In fact, he really likes it when a person's level is low and mental power is maximized. Therefore, in order not to waste much time, the mage decided to try to start the process of absorbing the soul of his opponent. Since Ben for his class is considered very strong, then for the mage is just the perfect specimen, for which he is really ready to fight, and fight to the last. When the process was launched, Ben began to experience a severe headache, with which it is really very difficult to fight, but so long cannot sell. If something is not urgently thought of, the story may end without even starting. As suddenly, the system sends a notification asking its owner, is it worthwhile to apply 30 styles of kendo techniques of destroying gods at this moment? This suggestion came in handy since the mental level is at S grade. The first of the 30 styles of kendo is Heavenly Enchanter. In between the processes, the magician tried to mock Ben in every possible way, telling him all sorts of unpleasant things, but so far he does not even roughly understand who he really messed with, and what awaits him next. As Ben was not a very talkative interlocutor, the mage decided not to waste any more time on idle talk, and to offer to do his work. At this moment the process of sealing begins, one of the final stages of preparation, you might say. Despite the fact that the guy is on his knees, he did not hesitate to say aloud that the magician is now very sorry that he stumbled upon it, and then go to hell to atone for his sins, which probably for a lifetime has accumulated quite a large number. At the same moment comes to activate the first technique of all 30 styles, so while there is time it is desirable to repent, in case in hell it will help something. From the outside it looks very grandiose. The sword flies to the opponent's head without touching his hands, and begins to work miracles. The pain was getting worse and worse with each passing second, and a little later the magician stopped seeing anything at all. He didn't like Ben's tricks very much, but instead of apologizing, in such a disadvantageous position he put threatening, although such a situation is the last thing to think about. By the way, Ben does not deny the fact that the magician had a chance to defeat him, but because he underestimated his opponent, and took this fight too lightly, he simply lost, although everything could have ended quite differently. After only a few minutes, a really strong magician, because of his negligence, lost his life. No matter how hard Ben was really on a thread, but nevertheless he managed to win the fight. For this, of course, he received some nice bonuses, in the form of various points. These points are really very useful, so the guy decided not to keep them on his balance, but to find a place to spend them to make his life easier in the future. In the meantime, the guy figured out how to use the system's internal menu correctly, and was pleasantly surprised at how convenient everything was. Also, after the victory, the guy took off the mage a very interesting bracelet. With its help you can always be aware of the latest news, very convenient thing in such conditions. First, Ben decided to check what is known about the Temple of the Ninth Star, because as far as he knows the reinforcements arrived there in time. It's also very important to disable the tracking sensor, as this mage was unusual, he probably has bugs nearby, so we need to be very careful in this regard, and don't neglect such things. So from the latest news it is reported that 2 days ago the Ninth Star Temple was suddenly invaded by beings from another planet and completely destroyed. It is also reported that father and son fought to the very end. The total number of fallen Ninth Star warriors is estimated at 3,932. After seeing the guy was just in shock, he could not believe that really no one managed to survive, and basically that all dressed are completely destroyed. Could it be that the magician wasn't lying after all? At the very beginning of the fight his father sent a distress signal to all the nearest headquarters at the same time. Then it didn't matter how late the reinforcements arrived, at least the process should have taken half an hour to 2 hours. But based on this news, one wonders if the signal could have been intercepted by some ill-wishers. Luckily Ben remembered his ID connection with his uncle who is the head of the 8th star. Surely he must know something. Surprisingly, he picked up the phone pretty quickly. The guy quickly introduced himself, and said that he was the minor holy sword of the Temple of the Ninth Star. At this point, Ben wondered how he could make his uncle believe him. He decided to remind him how his uncle had helped him, and had not told his father anything to allow him to take part in the second battle. He decided to remind him how his uncle had helped him, and had not said anything to his father to allow him to take part in the second battle. After these words, the man finally believed, but it was a shock to him, because he had seen the guy's body with his own eyes, and had long ago accepted that he was really gone. Of course he was curious about how the guy still survived. Ben will definitely tell, but we'll do it a little later because it's a very long story. The first thing he would like to do is to enter the Temple of the Ninth Star to conduct his own investigation. He also asked how the boy was doing, and how he was feeling. Everything was fine, the only downside was that the class had dropped significantly, but it was fixable, and everything would be back to normal in the near future. In the end, the guys agreed that the uncle will send someone to meet Ben, so now his main task is not to go anywhere and stay where he is. Suddenly a cute little animal runs up to the guy, and just starts begging to go with him. Of course Ben is a kind soul, in no way can order, so without hindsight ran after the pet. On arrival at the place he noticed lying on the floor unconscious girl. Looking at her guy realized that she is very serious. Probably she is one of those who use the mage. Apparently the pet is just begging for Ben to save her. But it's going to be hard to do because the wound is in a dangerous place, and at first glance, very deep. Anyway, you have to at least try, since the girl is unconscious at the moment, you can try to perform the procedure gently. In general, as soon as the guy drinks access to earlier, he used a potion that recently purchased in the store system. It was strange, but it worked almost instantly. The guy did not even have time to move away as planned, and the girl was already awake. Initially, the joy was just no limit, but then the girl thought that, in front of her is some bad man, and made him a strong slap. While flew from a strong blow, the girl managed to call him an evil hog, and an accomplice of the magician. Honestly, that's a lot of gratitude. Ben of course tried to explain to her that he had saved her life, but the girl was only angry that he thought it unnecessary. In just 2 words he explained that he had given her certain medicines, after which she woke up. She called the guy an evil thief, and promised that as soon as he was cured, he would cook him to pieces. To be honest, the guy didn't expect such an aggressive reaction. That's how you help people, and all you get in return is threats instead of gratitude. Pet looking at the whole situation from the outside, I just couldn't stop laughing. Ben was really pissed off, so this pet understands human speech. As soon as it started to smell fried, Pet immediately went to his mistress and explained everything. By the way, this beautiful lady's name is Elizabeth, and when she found out that Ben had actually saved her instead of trying to destroy her, she was terribly ashamed of what she'd said. To at least somehow redeem herself, the girl apologized and said that she was very grateful for the help. But still, Elizabeth was very concerned about the fact that a guy could look at her innermost being while she was unconscious. Unfortunately or fortunately, Ben didn't have time for these conversations, because a plane had already come to pick him up. To be honest, when the girl saw the 12-star plane, she was a bit shocked. She was very curious, then behind such a low-level person came an airplane of such a high class. Suddenly, the system sends an urgent notification, in which it informs that Ben urgently needs to leave the zone of high danger. The guy could not understand what was going on, because there was not even the slightest hint of danger around. That's why he assumed that it was just some kind of glitch. The boy didn't pay much attention to the notice, because at the moment, he really wanted only one thing: to go to the 9th-star base as soon as possible and start his sweet revenge for everything they had done. So that Ben would be discovered as soon as possible, he started jumping and waving his hand. At the same moment, the system seemed to go crazy. The warnings became even harsher. It was already saying that Ben's life was in danger, and he needed to find shelter as soon as possible, or the worst would happen. At one point, Ben notices that the plane, instead of landing on the ground, is pointing its guns at him and preparing to fire. Realizing what is about to happen, the guy is 100% sure that the system was telling the truth, and the request to find a shelter is not a mistake. In the end, without wasting a minute, the guy grabs this girl in his arms and starts running away with her in an unknown direction. At the very last moment, the guys manage to save themselves from a powerful first shot. A huge blue beam struck so close that because of the strong explosive wave, the guys began to fly apart from each other. Meanwhile, the pilot of this frantic shuttle just could not be happy, because he first received permission from the command to shoot at people. Then after the first powerful shot, followed by a whole bunch of others, although weaker, but at least it does not become safer, because the human body compared to the laser projectiles is just nothing. On the way, the girl started asking the guy what was going on here. She also asked him to let her go on the ground, because she could run on her own in the trailer. Frankly speaking, Ben didn't understand anything either, so he asked Elizabeth not to distract him, but just to obey. In this case, Elizabeth asked the boy to try to run a little faster, because she had an interesting idea. In the process of running, Ben realized that in his case it was best to spend attribute points exclusively on the agility parameter. So while there was an opportunity, the guy put all his points into just this attribute. And indeed it was the right decision, because from so many shots, a normal person would definitely never be able to come back. The pilot was getting angrier and angrier by the second, because right in front of his eyes Ben had gained a huge speed, which is certainly beyond the control of an ordinary person. But nevertheless it was even more interesting. In the process of such an active chase, the pilot even developed a little excitement. In the meantime, the plane was slowly catching up, despite its great speed. Elizabeth immediately realized that it couldn't go on like this for long, so she asked her pet to help them get away by using her magic skills. Of course, the pet did not even think of refusing, and immediately after this request began to collect a large amount of energy to help the guys. As soon as the energy reached its maximum, the pet from his 5th point began to release just a huge amount of smoke. After the smoke cleared, the new freshly made clones could be seen, to serve as bait while the original bodies hid somewhere. So far the plan had worked more than perfectly. Ben along with his new friends moved smoothly to the side while the clones ran on. To put it mildly, the pilot was getting tired of it, because he realized that he was flying at a tremendous speed, and the Ben was sometimes even faster. By the way, the pilot also noticed that there were twice as many people, but it did not confuse him, because the order was to destroy absolutely everyone. Taking the steering wheel firmly with both hands, the pilot began to try to develop even more speed, which is already considered critical for this type of transport, as well as he continued to just shoot continuously, which can lead to overheating of weapons. Meanwhile, the original bodies were already resting in some trench. The guy was so tired that for a long time he could not even unbend. And Elizabeth, in turn, even in such dangerous moments could not stop asking questions. She was extremely interested in what star was the one who pursued them. Well, now it's safe to say Ben has lost the last person in the world he can trust. He's on his own. As sad as it may sound, but a really close person turned away at the most difficult moment. Did he have something to do with what happened, and was involved in the attack on the 9 star? The girl realized how hard it was for the guy, so she said that she would feed him from now on, and maybe they could even become friends. Ben was clearly not in the mood, and answered the girl that he could take care of himself, so the best solution for both of them was to break up right now. To be honest, she was shocked when the guy refused her, especially since no one has the right to refuse her, and laugh at that. In general, while Elizabeth was thinking about what had just happened, Ben was already gone. Everything happened so fast that the girl couldn't even recognize his name. After a full week of being in this world, Ben has settled into the Deloitte settlement. At the moment, he is sitting in some nice place and slowly eating his dinner. By the way, despite the rather old-fashioned appearance of the city, inside everything looks quite modern. The guys at the next table were having a very active discussion about their boss, who hadn't been able to return for 3 days. The plan was that tomorrow was the deadline for entering the 12th Temple's Star Rift. According to all arrangements, he should have arrived yesterday, but it so happened that he was summoned by the young lord. There are rumors in the city that one of the most important mages has been destroyed, and so far no one knows who so powerful he encountered in that forest. Meanwhile, the news reported that due to the complete destruction of the 9th Star Temple, the rifts in the starry sky under its protection were losing stability. These guys were outraged that their 9th Star guys were so weak. Were they unable to stop the little beast raid? They also condemned the big and small sword, that is, they directly said that Ben and Charlie are just promoted personalities. In fact, they cannot resist anything, which is basically what happened. At the same moment, the man gets a glass in the head for such rotten words. Of course, the man did not like it very much, so he immediately promised to punish the one who did it. But so far we can observe more words than deeds, because Ben very confidently rushed in, and gave a strong blow with his fist on the face, this lover of loud remarks about others. Apparently Ben wasn't even going to stop there, but only to stretch. One of them decided to ask who was standing in front of them, and how he could even allow himself to do such a thing. In response, Ben said that all those who humiliate the Temple of the 9th Star will definitely be deprived of life. After these words, a total sweep of men who allow themselves to say such things in public places began. The first 2 simply ceased to function in the blink of an eye, and the third who tried to attack was able to live literally a few seconds longer. Ben dodged his punch without any problems and struck back. It was also decisive in their short fight. When the men realized that they couldn't beat Ben, they started to try to talk to him. At least they were curious about how much they had hurt the guy. The answer to that question was simply obvious. The guys had publicly insulted the 9th Star and her heroes, with absolutely no remorse. If it weren't for those heroes, people probably wouldn't even have the opportunity to sit in this joint. That's why none of these men deserve to live in this world. In the man's opinion, the Temple of the 9th Star no longer exists, which means no one should care what he says about them. But Ben does not think so. For him the 9th Star will always be alive, and the most favorite. Suddenly their chief burst into the institution. He became very interested in who it is rampaging on his territory. When the boss realized that this little brat had destroyed his men, he was instantly very angry, and then he added that only a man could dare to do such a thing, because he would have to answer for it, in a very harsh way, and it would be pointless to try to beg for mercy. In the trailer Ben was ready to fight with great pleasure, but the system immediately informed him that it was desirable to stay away from this character, because the chances of defeating him were extremely low. Also, before the fight, the big guy decided to mock a little, asking questions like, "Do you want to break all the bones at once or one by one?" For information, the boss of these guys D-class, so in fact, Ben can already be deliberately called deprived of life, but given his colorful past, to write the guy off so early, it would be quite wrong. He is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Because one of the men had gotten so cocky after the boss came in, I had to send him to the others. Such an act made the big guy even more angry, because no one in this settlement had ever allowed himself such impudence to destroy a mercenary right in front of the boss. At the moment when he was about to attack, the guy unexpectedly threw Black Magician's poison at the villain. When the flask shattered, Ben had only a few seconds to at least try to escape. At that moment, the big man realized to himself that the stranger was definitely closely connected to a recent incident that had happened to a famous magician. It gave him even more motivation to take down Ben as soon as possible, because then he would get the reward, and he could use it wisely in favor of his son. The first blow was incredibly powerful, and even though Ben blocked it, it flew far away and injured him a little. As soon as there was a good opportunity, the boss began to make a blow, which is able with its power to split the earth into two parts. To be frank, things are very bad. This big guy is really set to just wipe the guy off the face of the earth. Ben had nothing left but to try to take his most trump card at the moment, namely the Spirit Blade. But unfortunately it didn't help at all. The blade is only good for E-class opponents at most, and that may not always work, but here it was a completely different story. Right during the fight, the big man recognized that the guy's mental attack had almost worked, but apparently not this time. So he took the opportunity to run to hit Ben again as soon as possible, so that he wouldn't have the slightest chance to regain consciousness. Suddenly, right before the guy was about to get the decisive blow, the opponent starts to freeze abruptly, and becomes like an ice cube. It was definitely Elizabeth's doing. The guy couldn't believe that she had decided to follow him after all, but at least thanks for that. Of course, Ben did not waste such a sweet opportunity, and while his opponent was immobilized, he struck a decisive blow, which put an end to this confrontation. The big man fell to the ground without any signs of life with a rumble and great shame. For the destruction of the opponent, who is 2 classes above Ben, he is entitled to nice bonuses, in the form of as much as 100 points of attributes, and 30 additional points for bravery. Meanwhile, while the guy was trying to realize what happened, the rival contacted his master and asked to avenge him. Then after the fight, Elizabeth came up. She had just proved to Ben that he wasn't as capable as he thought, and if the girl hadn't come up in time, he probably wouldn't be alive anymore. For some reason the guy refused to accept that fact, and said he could have run up at any time. Anyway, Elizabeth decided to get acquainted and asked the guy's name. He answered and told her why he had decided to leave her. In his opinion, the girl would be in great danger if she went with him. In spite of this, the lady was quite positive, because she had already told a lot of things in her life. Meanwhile, the 12-star temple had organized a meeting about the latest incident at one of the local bars. But before they were held, the chief called the big guy a jerk, because he'd managed to lose his life to a F-grade kid, so what was the point of avenging that weakling? Also in parallel in the temple, a group was being trained, which should finally find out where the weakest point in the rift is to be found. The group is to be led by a new young, ambitious guy, who is usually the most troublesome of them all, but nevertheless, they have high hopes for him. At this point, the kid felt too important, and allowed himself to say that he and his team were certainly not that weak. The commander had to slap him once in the face so that he wouldn't get too cocky. For the commander, this operation will show whether he can achieve C-class, so without good news do not return. Also, before sending the boys on the mission, he reminded them that the pilot who had recently gone on a mission to destroy Ben had never returned. Anything could have happened to his plane. The guy probably just neutralized the pilot and took the plane for himself. As it turned out, the captain's guesses were not guesses at all, but the real truth. Despite the fact that Ben had already managed to make normal friends with Elizabeth, he couldn't stop thinking that he was putting their lives in danger too much. but he also had to consider the fact that he couldn't trust them completely. When the guys were still near the big guy, during the search, Ben found a special pass to the Temple of the Star, and a remote control of the ship. Who would have thought that this guy would think to take such valuable things with him? Unbelievable luck. After this discovery, Elizabeth told the guy the latest super-secret news, in general, the Temple of the 12th Star, so that there was no panic among the people, hid 2 rifts from public view. Only past the test people can get this pass. The big guy was really not so simple. By the way, when the guy found the key, he tried to hide it carefully in his jacket, but it didn't work. Elizabeth immediately noticed this rather bright object. In his defense, Ben said that the less you know, the better you sleep. But whoever's really curious is bound to figure it out. At one point, after 5 minutes of conversation, the girl realized that the guy's name was like one legendary person. Looking at her face, you could tell right away that this topic was pretty hard for her, because the person she was saying no more to had lost his life during the monster invasion on Star 9. But in order not to get too sad, Elizabeth decided to change the topic to a more optimistic one. Well, now that Ben has a pass, so does she, so it would be logical to go to the Temple of the 12th Star to fight monsters and become much stronger. Tomorrow is the last day to enter the rift this year. We need to discuss and decide how to get there as soon as possible. Ben didn't mind, but he asked me to do it a little later, because it had already been a while. When the boy suddenly started to leave, the girl thought that he wanted to run away again, but this time it was not so. Ben had deliberately stepped aside to call here a brand new space shuttle, thanks to which they would be able to reach the Temple of the 12th Star with great speed. The girl didn't realize that it was Ben's handiwork. She was very scared, and she was ready to run away. But when she saw her new acquaintance at the wheel, she was immediately happy, because now they can easily go to the octant. But as soon as Elizabeth shows a desire to get into the cockpit, the guy closed it, and immediately began to pick up speed. The girl just could not believe that he again wants to leave them, and go alone. And when it did happen, she began to feel very angry and resentful. After some time, Ben slowly began to approach the destination, and when he was already too close, the radars of the 12th Star detected the movement of their colleague's ship. Since the captain had anticipated this outcome, he had prepared an ambush for the boy. This time he was more right than ever. The ship was spotted early enough, there was no hurry. The most important thing now was to aim accurately, and make one decisive shot. By the way, they used their most powerful weapon, namely the laser cannon. In general, it can be used only in extreme cases, and with the permission of the command. But the guys will hope that no one will notice, because the plan is to perform the task perfectly. The target has been successfully located and the light cannon has begun the charging process. This gun is camouflaged under an inconspicuous pyramid. In case a person flies here for the first time, then with 100% probability by eye he will not be able to understand where the air defense means are hunting here. The shot turned out to be perfectly accurate, and easily neutralized the target. The plane literally, after the explosion, crumbled into small pieces. The chance of survival in such conditions is 0. But our hero is also not a miscalculation. As a former head of the Star Squadron, he expected his colleagues for the garden around this place, so he left the ship in advance, and already on foot went further. When the special group went to the crash site, it was sure in advance that the pilot must have lost his life. But for some reason the body could not be found. The fact that there was no body did not confuse the main group in any way, because the energy of the light gun is thousands of degrees, it must have simply burned. When suddenly another man comes running up to the guys with some not so good news. In general, from the guard of the rift received a message that literally just now someone went to the pass. In general, the situation became very confusing. In fact, to enter with the key could absolutely any employee, and there is nothing wrong with that. Right in the middle of this heated discussion, another ship appears in the sky. Frankly, they were just shocked. Because normally all flights are known in advance, and now they see a second ship coming in unannounced. As it turned out later, it was Elizabeth. Well, getting rid of her wasn't as easy as you'd think. When the girl was almost there, she asked the pilots to give her the wheel and leave quietly. Also, if any of them thought to tell her father about what had happened, it would be bad for everyone. Meanwhile, on the rift, fierce battles were in full swing as warriors fought countless monsters that were constantly being replenished. It had already been a long time since it had started, and the fighting had not subsided for a moment. In the process, some warriors are already so accustomed that they began to enjoy it. No matter how you look at it, has its advantages. After each destroyed monster, the performer receives a large number of bonuses, also in parallel increases his personal class, and at the end of the war you can become very powerful. As suddenly the guys from one magician received news that the search area is reduced to 1 kilometer, and that the exact location will be found out in a few days. To be honest, it's starting to get very angry, because it's been 5 whole days, and the position has not been established, for what they are paid at all. The only alarming thing is the fact that just yesterday there were many times more monsters, and today, for some reason, there are fewer of them. The only thing that is alarming is the fact that just yesterday there were many more monsters, and today for some reason there are fewer of them. At the moment is engaged in the one who collects a whole bunch of monsters, and then at one point they all freeze, so that in case of what they could not turn around and start to run away. It's just the perfect tactic that allows you to maximize the efficiency of doing their work and enjoy it. In just 5 days of non-stop battles, Guy managed to slay hundreds of monsters, and along the way gained E-class level. He even grew soul points. That means it's time to practice the second of the 30 styles of Kendo, the god-killing technique. It remains only to make a final push and destroy all the frozen monsters, as they say not to lose a good thing. As it was, but the difference between F-class and E-class can be seen at once. The guy literally in the blink of an eye copes with all the obstacles. Suddenly, quite unexpectedly, a new batch of monsters appears on the horizon, which almost immediately pounced on the guy. Of course, this did not embarrass him a bit, even a little pleased, because there was a unique opportunity to test 253 points of strength. With just one swing of his sword, he was able to deal damage to absolutely all the new monsters. It's really something incredible. And when some of them started trying to run away, Ben said some phrase, and they all just took fatal damage in an instant. Then a little later Ben had to cope with one of the leaders of the D-class monsters. For this he had to use the last vial of Black Mage, and accumulate the maximum amount of strength, so that each of his blows brought maximum benefit, and energy was not wasted. As soon as everything was ready, Ben immediately rushed into battle, so at first glance it may seem that everything is more than fine, because the monster received a fatal damage, after which he could no longer stand on his feet and fell to the ground. As a rule, after the victory begins the countdown system, and if this report has not begun, it means that the opponent is not yet completely neutralized. Ben turned back to see that behind his back stands the same monster, but already full of strength and energy, and he is preparing to strike his signature blow. The guy manages to return in time, and prolong his life for some indefinite period of time. Also, not to prolong this duel, Ben decided to immediately conduct a counterattack, which surprisingly came more than successfully. The second decisive blow worked as well as the first. And now the system sent a notification saying that it sincerely congratulated the guy on his promotion to D level. By the way, the master was so heavy that even after he fell, the earth continued to shake for a while. Of course, that's very cool, but time is running out and we have to keep working. Suddenly the guy heard somewhere in the distance just the strongest roar. To be frank, he was very surprised, for sure it was some new beasts. In the meantime, the search party returned to their captain and reported that they had tried their best, but only managed to find out the approximate location. The captain just laughed and reminded them of what they had told him earlier. "We will not fail, we are the best," and so on. In the end, he gave them 2 more days to try to fix the terrible situation, otherwise they would be seriously punished. At one moment, the men noticed that there were 3 leaders of the G-class coming at them, and to be frank, they were very dangerous creatures, and one had to be extremely careful with them. In spite of this, the captain, unlike his charges, was not frightened at all, and was ready to take the fight even against the three. At the same moment, Ben was following this group of monsters, and he was extremely surprised that they passed by him, did not even want to attack. This suggests only one thing, so they were attracted by something more interesting. What could it be? In the meantime, the men who were too frightened to fight were just frozen in their seats, and couldn't even find the strength to leave the place. Those who were ready to fight immediately went into battle mode and prepared to attack the monsters in return. The captain already felt like a fish in the water, so without any problems began to destroy the first monster. As soon as Ben realized that the monster was about to lose his life, he immediately struck his last blow, thus taking all the bonuses for himself, because in fact it was his prey. The captain didn't like such an act, and now he is very interested in who allowed himself to take his prey, because in these parts there is no one more important than him. Ben did not run away, so the guys had a unique opportunity to talk to each other. The captain immediately asked Ben how he'd managed to get here, given the latest air defense system and professional search team. The guy immediately realized that he was facing the same patron, the big guy he had destroyed. It was even a little funny. By the way, while the guys just stood and talked among themselves, every minute, the captain had one less ward, because the monsters were very strong, and not all the guys had at least D-class to fight with them decently. Elizabeth also finally found Ben again. Suddenly, something abnormal began to happen. In the exact spot where the people and monsters were, a circle formed, which eventually began to glow very brightly. This symbolizes that the tomb that the captain has been searching for years is right there. As soon as the whole process began to develop very actively, the captain ordered his wards to destroy all the strangers. I wonder how he even imagines it, because his people could not even cope with the monsters. At one point, these things began to burn, and no one could not even for what reason it happened. In just a few more minutes the ground starts to fail and all the guys start to fall down. It felt like a long flight, but the landing was not the worst. It certainly hurt a little, but not as much as it could have been. And now the most important question, what is this place, and where did the palace appear in the rift? In general, everyone was puzzled except the captain, but he even began to rejoice. After all, he finally managed to find the last king of the country of storms, the first awakened in the world. Ben was more stressed at this point by the fact that the rift had closed immediately after they landed. What the hell was this cursed place? How could they even get out of here? He had to keep his eyes open, because the way out might be somewhere close by. When the old man heard about the land of storms, he almost went crazy, because all his life he thought it was a fictional country and it did not exist at all, but now all the legends were confirmed. Legend has it that the land of storms is located in the southern hemisphere. It was the first place on Earth to be invaded by alien beings. Rumor has it that this country lost faith in itself and fell into despair when many of its people lost their lives. The king began to drink heavily and forgot about his people. But after awakening and achieving a class, he began to repent. He tried his best to persuade the remaining citizens to join the resistance, but the past greatness could not be regained. He had been in a bender for too long. Could it be that the flaming man on the throne was the last king of Stormland? According to the information Elizabeth knew, he was destroyed by a mysterious black magic. And the captain could not be happy. He knows that there is a lot of valuable treasures. Now his main goal is to get them for himself. After he once again ordered to decapitate all the strangers and begin the task, at the same moment, the room begins to fill with water, but not ordinary. From it comes a very pleasant aroma, which literally can drive you crazy. The desire to at least a little taste begins to take over everything. So Elizabeth is a stable woman. She was able to adequately assess the situation, and realize that most likely this is such a bait or distraction, so she kept herself in control. But grandfather slowly began to lose his head, a little more and he will start it until it just does not burst, so much he wants. The warriors who were an order of magnitude stronger than those who started drinking the water, looked at all this from the outside and just could not believe it. These people, as well as they are called warriors, from now on, They are even ashamed to be called so. They are just some zombies, not real men. Even the pet didn't fall for it. The system told Ben that this water had been lost a long time ago. It was called Dragon's Smile. It was brewed from 72 rare materials, and it also contained powerful energy. If you drink it in moderation, everything will be fine, but if a person drinks too much, it will cause irreversible consequences. In just a few seconds, the men could not get their heads out of the water. They were so thirsty that they could no longer control themselves. And when one of them tried to refuse, the other took his head and forced him to drink, arguing that it would make him much stronger. Since the system ruined to make 3 sips, the guy decided not to hold back in this regard and also try it. The effect is just instantaneous. Honestly, even 1 sip is enough to suffer from withdrawal. But nevertheless, the guy immediately raised his level to middle class. He even started to get mad and say that he didn't have enough. Only Elizabeth was left out, because she understood that free cheese is only in a mousetrap, and under no circumstances should you try it, even in a tolerable amount. When the water had nowhere else to fit, the men began bragging about their accomplishments, and saying who had risen to what level.